Assalamu alaikum. This is Hena Zuberi, and you're watching Muslim Network News. Our top story tonight is on Iranian elections and the president elect, Raisi. Iran's new president says he will not meet President Joe Biden. While addressing his first press conference, the newly elected Ibrahim Raisi also declared ballistic missiles non negotiable. Raisi has the backing of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. In the meantime, Iran shut down its only nuclear reactor for technical reasons. Emergency closure of the reactor follows a string of explosions and blackouts at key nuclear facilities over the last year. Iran blamed those incidences on Israel. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman denounced it as nuclear terrorism. Meanwhile, Israel's newly elected Prime Minister Naftali Bennett warned global powers to wake up on the Iran nuclear deal. The 2015 deal granted Iran relief from sanctions in exchange for curbs on its nuclear program. A detailed analysis is coming up later tonight on our show, so keep watching Muslim Network News. Austria is investigating a series of anti-Muslim raids that have been described as politically motivated. The Austrian Federal Anti-Corruption Office is probing former senior government officials responsible for the Islamophobic raids. It is also investigating the rights violations of these raids and their impact on children. Austrian police conducted the high-profile violent raids on 60 Austrian Muslim homes last November. It left 62 children psychologically traumatized. Austrian Muslims have welcomed news of the investigation. In the meantime, the organization Muslim Youth Austria is filing a lawsuit against the country's controversial mosque map. Labeled as the Map of Political Islam, the document revealed the names and locations of over 600 mosques and associations in Austria. The map was unveiled on Thursday. Bishop Michael Kalupka of the Protestant Church called for it to be taken down. The University of Vienna has also asked for its logo to be removed from the map. The controversial map was publicized by anti-Muslim integration minister Suzanne Raab. The Austrian government says it is a tool in the fight against political Islam. The government has not issued similar maps of any other religion in the country. 3 Muslim men were lynched this Sunday in Tripura. Ziad Hussain, Bilal Mia, and Saiful Islam were chased down by a mob armed with lethal weapons in Tripura, India. 2 Dalits were also lynched over the last week. Muslims in India, as well as members of the Dalit community, have become the primary targets of lynchings. Right-wing Hindutva groups are often involved in the lynching mobs. In the month of June, 11 people have been lynched based on accusations of eating beef or transporting cows. However, this is considered an undercount by many, as journalists are often threatened for reporting such violence. India is at 142 place for press freedom worldwide, according to Reporters Without Borders. Indian police recently raided the offices of Twitter in Delhi. China has set a target of fully vaccinating 40% of the country by the end of this month. The country has 4 approved vaccines, but their efficacy rates remain behind those of Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna jabs. Pfizer has 95% and Moderna 94% success rates. China's range is between 50 to 79%. China has been a primary player in vaccine diplomacy in the developing world. However, the US is now catching up with improved vaccines. The number of shots administered globally surpassed 2.5 billion on Friday, according to an AFP count from official sources. In the meantime, scientific models predict that COVID infections in the US could surge this fall if vaccination rates lag. In domestic news, America celebrated its first Juneteenth in the nation's capital on Saturday. Celebrations of the new holiday in Washington, D.C. included block parties and special lighting at the Washington National Cathedral. The Juneteenth flag hung over state capitals and the city buildings. Last week, the US Senate unanimously passed the Juneteenth National Independence Day Act. This established Juneteenth as a federal holiday. It is the first new federal holiday created by the US Congress in nearly 40 years. On June 19, 1865, the last African Americans enslaved in the state of Texas learned that they had been freed. This was 2 years after President Abraham Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Juneteenth has been celebrated annually since 1886, but only in some parts of the United States. The holiday was not pleasant for Republican Senator Ron Johnson. During a Juneteenth event in Milwaukee on Saturday, a crowd swore at him and said, "We don't want you here." Last year, the Wisconsin Republican blocked legislation to make Juneteenth a national holiday. Father's Day weekend was marred by gun violence. Multiple shootings in Colorado, Michigan, Louisiana, and other states have left the nation reeling. The first 6 months of 2021 has seen over 20,000 deaths from gun violence, according to NPR. This includes 700 children and teens. With the start of the summer, there's no sign of it abating. Last Friday, Colorado Springs had 5 shootings that injured 5 people. The following day, in Flint, Michigan, a woman died after she was fatally shot by the police. She had allegedly exchanged gunfire with them near a Juneteenth parade. Also on Saturday, in Louisiana, 6 people were shot, of which 2 were fatal. Finally, on Sunday, 2 children were among the 8 people shot in East Dallas, Texas, after an argument at a party. The US Congress is again launching a number of gun control initiatives to rein in the violence. Democrats are preparing to vote on a scaled down bill on gun control. They hope this will unite the party and pick up some Republican support, but this effort is also likely to fail in the Senate. The US Senate is set to vote on whether to advance the For the People Act. The bill's provisions include declaring Election Day a public holiday, expanding early voting to at least 15 consecutive days, and banning partisan gerrymandering. Currently, it lacks Republican support and falls short of the 60 votes needed to pass. But last week, centrist Democratic Senator Joe Manchin proposed a number of changes in an effort to gain Republican acceptance of the bill. They include requiring identification to vote that offers a utility bill as an alternative. Republicans emphasize strong proof of voting status as a way to deter potential voter fraud. Many progressives view the requirements as roadblocks to voting that are discriminatory towards racial minorities. Democratic voting rights activist Stacey Abrams endorsed Manchin's compromise. Democratic Senator Bernie Sanders also said that he may be open to supporting Manchin's proposed changes. In Ohio, recent testing of backlogged rape kits has led to a large number of arrests. After processing nearly 5,000 untested kits, Cuyahoga County found that at least 1 of every 4 alleged rapists identified was a suspected serial offender. As of September 2020, the investigation has led to more than 800 indictments. Cuyahoga County Prosecutor Timothy McGinty said that the rape kits are the best bargain in the history of law enforcement. Money has long been used as an excuse not to test these kits. The average cost of DNA testing is $5,000 per kit. But the tool has successfully helped solve cases by providing evidence that has led to arrests of rapists. Rohingya's endless search for freedom continues. The United Nations has praised Indonesia for rescuing a Rohingya boat off their shores. 81 Rohingya genocide survivors were rescued early this month. More details in this report by Ali Khalaf and Saleha Farouk.
These Rohingya were on a tiny boat for 113 days. Finally, 81 were rescued while 9 died during the horrible journey. They left the camps in Bangladesh, which locked them behind barbed wires. Their engine broke down, leaving the group adrift at sea. Indonesian fishermen discovered their stranded vessel and brought them to safety. The United Nations appreciated Indonesians for their rescue. The UN noted that this was not the first time Rohingya refugees at sea had been rescued by the fishermen in Aceh, Indonesia. This was the latest in a wave of arrivals, since the last 400 Rohingya who made it to the Indonesian coasts. Muhammad Ilyas, a 37-year-old refugee, said the group beached their boat on the island because it was damaged. They were hoping to land in neighboring Malaysia, where more than 100,000 Rohingya live.
We were hungry. I couldn't drink. There was no drinking water. There was no food, no rice. We couldn't eat. It was like that at the sea for 1 month. Our engine was damaged and our boat was damaged. Where could we go? We could only say help, help, help.
Since the boat mostly had women and children, it is likely they were sailing to join their families in Malaysia. Malaysia is a choice destination for Rohingya Muslims, Christian Kachin, and Karen Buddhist minorities of Burma. Burma, also called Myanmar, has been persecuting its minorities for decades. The International Court of Justice noted that Rohingya are facing a genocide. Around 1 million Muslim Rohingya live in cramped camps in Bangladesh, where human traffickers run lucrative operations promising to find them sanctuary abroad. The Rohingya fled from Buddhist-majority Myanmar to escape a military crackdown against them 4 years ago that UN investigators said amounted to genocide.
Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment. So stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you and you could be me for just 1 hour, if we could find a way to get inside each other's minds, walk a mile in my shoes, walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize and accuse, walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Welcome back. Yesterday, the world marked World Refugee Day, carrying the theme of inclusion. This emphasized the advantages for both refugees and their host countries of integrating refugee populations into the national health, education, and employment systems. Dr. James Hathaway is joining Saleha Farouk for a detailed conversation on the refugee crisis in the world. Over to you, Saleha.
Thank you. Today, we're very happy to be joined by Dr. James Hathaway, who is the director of the Refugee and Asylum Law Program at the University of Michigan. Dr. James Hathaway, thank you so much for being here with us today.
My pleasure.
Now, I wanted to begin first with a really fascinating report that you had published called The Global Cop-Out on Refugees. And this report, of course, explored many things, but namely the difficulties of international governments to safeguard refugees, asylum seekers, stateless persons, as well as proposed solutions and recommendations. And I just wanted to get a feel of what had led you to write that report and what kind of solutions or recommendations came out of it.
So there was a major United Nations initiative a couple of years ago that led to what's called the Global Compact on Refugees. By the way, look at the framing of that, the Global Compact on refugees, not for refugees. And that actually tells you everything you need to know. The governments of the world basically agreed to some vague principles that could be rolled out in the event of a major refugee movement, but committed themselves to absolutely nothing. And so we ended up in a situation where now we've got 85% of the world's refugees stuck in poor countries with no support from wealthy countries, where we have those same small number of wealthy countries spending 4 times as much to look after the tiny 15% of refugees they receive as the rest of the world gets for the 85%. And my article really was trying to explain why the United Nations had effectively done a cop-out on refugees. It had not actually offered anything that would provide a solution to the dilemmas we have. I mean, the critical point right now is that more than half of the world's refugee population, millions of refugees, have been waiting more than 20 years, stuck in camps or other hellholes, waiting for a solution with none in sight. And this new proposal from the UN offered absolutely nothing that was guaranteed to fix that. And I thought it was time that we said that out loud.
Now, when speaking about the United Nations, the UNHCR recently argued that refugees do require international support, but they have a hard time accessing it because of difficult as well as controversial policies in such majoritarian countries. What would be your response to that?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, but again, think back to it, right? The problem is there's no system to share burdens, meaning money, and responsibilities, meaning people, under the current system. So if you don't want refugees, what you do is you put up barriers to stop them from entering. As soon as they enter, they're 100% your responsibility. So that's an inevitable result of a system that is poorly designed. If you had actually done what my team had proposed, namely to move from a one by one individual state system to a global system where we share burdens and responsibilities, then the place that you arrive might not be the place where you're protected. Everybody would have a duty to fund it, and there would be no incentive to close the doors. So if UNHCR is concerned, as it should be, about the fact that many countries are not living up to their obligations, they needed to offer a real binding mechanism to fix that, instead of a lot of vague principles that nobody is obliged to do anything about.
Some great insight there. I wanted to take the conversation to governments, as you mentioned. Now, the Biden administration has recently boosted the refugee cap to approximately 62,000 refugee admissions this year, and he's expressed wishes to boost it further to approximately 125,000. In your professional opinion, how would this impact any pitfalls in the current migration and asylum system in the United States? And you are a professor at the University of Michigan.
So look, increasing resettlement is really wonderful for the human beings involved. There's no question about that. And again, keep in mind what I'm saying. There have been more than 13 million refugees waiting for a solution for an average of 20 years. So any number is good. The problem, though, is that in any given year, even with these new American numbers, less than 1% of the protracted refugee population gets a solution. So it's a great thing for the human beings involved. I do not wish to caricature that, but it doesn't come anywhere close to a solution to the dilemma of protection. 99% plus of refugees are still going to be stuck in difficult situations, and this won't fix that.
Now, going back to the UNHCR, they do report that approximately 82 million people are displaced globally, according to this UN body. Let's talk about the coronavirus. That's something that's affecting minorities all around the world. How are refugees, however, particularly and disproportionately exposed to either COVID, and as well as how would this affect their resettlement plans and the trajectory of their journey, essentially?
So I need to take you back one point, right? The 82 million number is not accurate. The 82 million number that the UNHCR puts forward is designed to inflate the extent of both their responsibilities and what they would characterize as the problem. Of the 82 million, 48 million are people who are still inside their own country, and they're effectively internal human rights victims. The total number of refugees is around 25 million, including people claiming refugee status. And that number has been pretty stable for a long time. So there is actually no global refugee crisis. there is a protection crisis, which means that there isn't a mechanism to respond to those numbers. But the numbers are not growing significantly. And the inflated numbers that have been put out really do not give a fair picture of the number of people crossing borders looking for protection at all. The COVID era has simply intensified what was already there, in my view. States were already disinclined to admit refugees. Again, if somebody who arrives at your border is 100% your responsibility, and no other countries, no matter how rich, no matter how powerful, owe you anything, you have an incentive to say no. And so that incentive was already there. And we saw it not only in rich countries, but also an increasing number of middle income and poorer countries that are closing the doors to refugees. COVID intensified that. It gave countries a pretext to say no that seemed to be more legitimate than what they had been saying previously, which was simply that they didn't want them. But honestly, I don't think it fundamentally changed the nature of the dilemma. The dilemma is that if you want at-risk persecuted people to have a place to go safely, you need a system that treats both the refugees and the predominantly poor countries to which they flee in a way that is fair. And we do not have that now, which is why doors are closing.
We often hear about this concept of responsibility to protect, as well as the global responsibility or legal obligations for countries to abide by the Refugee Convention. What impact do these such international legal responsibilities and refugee conventions have on countries, and what is stopping global governance from perhaps coming in and changing those structural issues that you mentioned?
I think it's two words: political will. That's it. I mean, there is nothing wrong with the Refugee Convention. I mean, there is one thing wrong with it that I'll mention briefly, which is important. It structurally excludes 6 million Palestinian refugees. It is a racist exclusion that treats Palestinians as non-refugees under the UN Refugee Treaty. That, I think, is pretty fundamental. Aside from that one racist exclusion, the definition of refugees as persecuted people because of who they are or what they believe, and the rights that they get under the treaty, rights to enter, to start businesses, to educate their children, etc., are perfectly sensible and workable. So there is nothing wrong, in my view, with the treaty. The normative vehicle is more than adequate to respond to the challenges of today. What is hideously wrong, though, are the mechanisms to implement it. If we don't have a system that actually dependably enables people to get access to protection, that shares out the responsibility to protect, that fairly apportions the financial burdens of protection, that gives governments that open their doors to refugees a clear basis to understand that other countries farther away will take on their share of that responsibility, then it's destined to fail. And that's where we are right now.
We touched upon how certain factors such as COVID are currently exacerbating the refugee crisis. If we could just highlight a few other factors and get your take on that. So, for example, we seldom hear about people, or refugees rather, drowning in the Mediterranean. But for example, just this year, approximately 815 people have died trying to cross that journey, according to the IOM. If you could talk to us about the potential for human loss during this journey and how such factors, including maybe trafficking, can play a role in this trajectory.
So if you want to eliminate the market for traffickers, let people come. Don't put up barriers. The traffickers only have a market because countries have put up walls that preclude people from asking for asylum in a fair way. There would be no reason to mortgage your future to a trafficker if you could fairly and reasonably walk up to the door and submit your asylum claim. That's not the reality right now. And in fact, as you allude in your question, in the Mediterranean, it's much worse than that. The European Union is actually training and funding the Libyan Navy to go out and intercept people and lock them up in hideous torture chambers. Now, that's not simply not welcoming them. That is taking affirmative negative steps that breach law. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees has, in my view, tragically been very quiet about that phenomenon. You say we haven't heard much about it, but the honest truth is, those of us in the refugee world have been frenetically trying to put this issue front and forward for years now. It used to be the United States and the Caribbean doing this with Haitians. It's the European Union and the Australians and others who are at the forefront of extraterritorial deterrence right now. They're doing illegal things in spaces that they believe they won't be caught. And again, until we have a system that gives them an incentive to play within the rules, because it's managed and organized and not simply about avoiding responsibility, this is tragically logical behavior if they can get away with it. And they are right now.
Now, you mentioned Palestinians being excluded from the Refugee Convention. Just bringing me to my next point here, more than 2/3 of all refugees stem from just around 5 countries, all of which are in Asia. If you can talk to us about the one outlier right now being Venezuela and its refugee and migration crisis, and also Venezuela has been trending in the news for the past few weeks as well.
Yeah, look, so I don't think there's anything particularly special about the Venezuelan situation in legal terms. I mean, the UNHCR has a hard time classifying them. They don't call them refugees, but they just call them Venezuelans in their statistics, which seems very odd to me. By and large, they're fleeing a situation of endemic human rights abuse that the state is unwilling or unable to respond to. And that's a classic definition of a refugee, particularly in Latin America as in Africa, where there is an extended regional definition of status. So there was no need to equivocate about the fact that this is effectively a failed state. Venezuela is a failed state, but so too, if we look at Syria, we look at Myanmar, we look at Afghanistan, we look at South Sudan, the other top countries producing refugees, they are all failed states. They are states that are not doing their basic job. And ironically, that's exactly the group for whom refugee law was created. Refugee law was created to let people move to another country to live in safety when their own country couldn't or wouldn't do its basic job. So go down that list: Syria, Myanmar, Afghanistan, Venezuela, South Sudan. The top 5 countries producing 2/3 of the world's refugees are all in the failed state category.
Dr. James Hathaway is the director of the Refugee and Asylum Law Program at the University of Michigan. Dr. James, thank you so much for your important insights today and your time for being with us.
Thank you.
Back to Hena Zuberi in the news studio.
Thank you, Saleha and Dr. Hathaway. Before moving on to our next analysis, let's take a quick break. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. Ibrahim Raisi, Iran's judiciary chief, has won the country's presidential election. Raisi won 61.95% of the vote in Friday's election on a voter turnout of 48.8%. This was the lowest turnout in the Islamic Republic's history. To speak about the Iranian election and the president elect Raisi and his policies, let's go to Dr. Amina Al-Din. Over to you, Dr. Amina.
Thank you, Hena Zuberi. I have the wonderful opportunity today to talk about the very recent Iranian elections and the newly elected president under a lot of controversy is Ibrahim Raisi. And to talk a little bit about his understandings of foreign policy, but also to talk about what's going on in Iran. My guest today is Yusuf Azizi, and Yusuf is a PhD student in public administration at Virginia Tech in Alexandria, Virginia. Arlington's stuck in my mind. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So let's first talk about Iran and where it is today to put this new election in some kind of perspective. I know that there was a lot of uproar over the now former president, and then a lot of controversy with the newly elected president. So before we get to this presidential stuff, let's talk about public affairs in Iran.
Okay, yes. So Iran is like United States. The political system includes three branches of government: the executive branch, the parliament, and the judiciary. So they have, since 1979, the Islamic Revolution in 1979, they have a kind of hybrid regime. It is not all democratically elected politicians. Some of them are coming to the power, to the officials by selection. So it is a hybrid regime. We cannot put it as a really dictatorship or theatrical regime. We cannot put it as a democratic regime like the Western countries, if we assume they are Democrat. It is a little, it is a little bit, has a background, a complicated background about the Iranian, about more than 100 years. They are struggling for freedom, for justice, for all of the values that we respect in Islam too, but also we know that the humanities also respect that.
But how did these mullahs and everybody, I know that the government is split into two, and you have a religious side and a kind of a political side, which somehow or the other cohere. But why are the people struggling? What are they struggling for?
So there are different people. The country has more than 80 million people, and each of them has different idea. There are Islamic beliefs there are secular people there are nationalist people there. So there are a lot of factors that participated in every people's mind to decide about the issues. But one of the most important challenges that Iran has, many countries has, even United States, even Western countries, and we can see in the pandemic, it is about the trust in government. And the trust in government now not in a good shape in Iran. Okay, it is due to bad decision making, it's bad policy making by the previous administration. I mean, the current administration, the Rouhani administration, or even it is because of fundamental issues like the structural, political structure of the constitution. That the constitution can be revised. This is the expectation that many people now asked for that. So I mean that the social movement and the needs that people require for better government, better governance, is something that now apparent for everyone in Iran. And the question is that the elite and the parties and the officials would like to step forward for that revision and reform in this section.
So who is this new president? And is he different from the old one? Is he going to bring reform? What's he going to do?
If we divide the foreign policy and domestic policy, this is just a hope, and we hope that because the new president Ibrahim Raisi, he has worked for over 40 years since the Islamic Revolution happened in Iran in the judiciary system against the corruption, against all of these law and regulation, to confirm that. And one of his slogan during the campaign about the corruption in executive branch, he believed that, okay, we did our job in judiciary, but it's not enough. We have to protect the civil rights. We have to protect the budgetary from the deficit from the executive branch, because of what happened as a corruption in Iran. Some people said that it is systematic corruption. Some believe no, it is not systematic. It's just some bad apples in the system. But he believes, and many people trusted him, that he could have some changes in this regard about the corruption in the executive branch, in the signing agreement and all of these issues we have in the United States, maybe in the past more, but now less. So this is one of the hope. But let's see if he is not willing to change some of the fundamental issues, as I mentioned before, in the political spectrum, in the political environment. So he would fail in the next 4 years, and people also would lose their hope in him. But near 18 million people voted for him. So this is one of the most important challenges he has in the next administration.
Well, we know that the U.S. has led the way toward putting sanctions on Iran, and that has curbed the people's access to vital kind of substances. I have to admit, I don't understand putting sanctions on a country. We have nuclear weapons. The Western country have nuclear weapons. India, China, but we're determined that Iran doesn't have nuclear weapons. But the other thing is that recently Mossad snuck into Iran and stole some stuff. I am anxious to hear about that.
So yeah, on foreign policy, Iran has been under sanctions since the revolution, because it is. But the toughest sanction on Iran happened during the last the Obama administration, and then continued during the Trump administration. So the sanction is not something that Iranian strangers that they know how they can cope against that. So over that, but the fact is that Iran doesn't have any nuclear bomb, and the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, was signed that the Western countries and the United Nations Security Council, all of them has enough inspection and oversight on Iranian activities in nuclear issues, that they make sure even if anytime Iran want to diverge its program, its civil program to nuclear bomb or atomic bomb, so they know it beforehand, about 1 year before that happens, so they can do something in the international organization or international vote. So I mean that this is one of the main argument that President Obama and President Biden right now have about the restoring JCPOA, because when JCPOA is restored, the Iran nuclear program would be in the box that everyone can see and oversight and have a scrutiny over that, so they know what's happening there. And this is the only case within the struggle that Iran has with the West, especially the United States, that also the China and Russia agree on that okay, we don't want Iran access to the nuclear bomb. We want to have some kind of words on that. And Iran also too. Iran says that, okay, we are not looking for the bomb. We are looking for just using it as an energy, as medical issues. So it is very good to cooperate to each other about this issue.
Well, then why did Israel send Mossad to go tipping around in Iranian territory?
So an Israeli issue, as you mentioned, many countries has a nuclear bomb. Israel has nuclear bomb too, and they are not under any kind of investigation by the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. So they wanted to, the Netanyahu, he wanted to say that, okay, Iranians say lie within sign the JCPOA. They are still looking for something bad. They are still have some secret program. But as a matter of fact, we know
does the same thing. I mean, Iran is not. If the Iranians are lying, so are the Israelis and everybody else out there.
Yeah. So I wanted to say that, yeah, the file that he claimed that he stole from Iran, as the intelligence service in the United States says, it is before 2003. And the intelligence services in the United States, they confirmed several times that even if Iran has any kind of military nuclear program before 2003, after 2003, Iran diminished any kind of secret program. And all of the program Iran has from the beginning, from uranium enrichment to the centrifuge, to all advanced centrifuge, everything now under the investigation by the IEA. Everything in the country are investigated in the country. And no countries in the world has this kind of investigation on the country.
Exactly. I mean, so what does this new president think about all of this, from the sanctions to, do you think he's going to agree to talk with Biden to get a new deal to lift some of these sanctions? What's going to happen? I mean, or at least what does this new president promise he's going to do?
Yeah, before I answer your question, let me just mention two basic issues. First of all, it's like most other countries. We don't expect that Iran's foreign policy will be fundamentally changed by transferring power between administration and election. Okay. Maybe Mr. Trump was exceptional in some ways, but if you see United States, the whole national security and agenda and foreign policy application, it's not many changes between the government coming and the next government coming, between Democrat or Republican. A second issue is that the Iran's foreign policy decision-making is conducted by the Supreme National Security Council. This council is a very heavy hand for the supreme leader and has been intentionally designed to reflect diverse political views between Iranian politicians. This council includes politicians from across Iran political spectrum, so-called moderates, conservatives, principalists, and even sometimes reformists. So the council includes the head of three branches of government: parliament, judiciary, executive, and minister related to the national security issues, like the foreign affairs minister, the military and intelligence organization, and also representative from the supreme leader. So this is another factor that they wanted to say. I believe we would not see many changes, sharp changes in Iran foreign policy. But on nuclear issues, as you mentioned, particular nuclear issues, we know that the new administration in Iran, Mr. Raisi, he will be inaugurated in early August. So in the next 40 days, we still have the Rouhani and Zarif as who led the negotiation with the United States. And just yesterday, the news came up from the last round of the negotiation in Vienna that all parties, especially the United States and Iran, they are in the final phases to restore the 2015 Iran nuclear deal named JCPOA. So I believe that before Raisi came to the office, comes to the office, actually, this deal will be restored. And also, Raisi himself, during the campaign, during the public debate, he said, okay, I'm not against the nuclear deal. I'm not against the JCPOA. We just want to receive the benefits we expected from the deal in 2015. But we didn't receive anything. Trump comes and, came and withdrew from the deal and put all of the sanction against Iran again. So they said that, okay, the major issues that Iran needs is to sell freely its oil, petroleum, and natural resources, and also freely can transfer the currency into the government, into the country. They wanted to access to the international financial system. So if this happens and they get the guarantee that the United States never come out of the deal again, so they don't have any problem to restore the JCPOA, because at least for the limited time it can lift some of the sanction, and they can get some benefits for the economy, for the fragile economy Iran has.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Iran is, There's a lot to talk about, but I want to thank you, Mr. Azizi, for coming and spending some time with us. Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Dr. Amna and Dr. Azizi. Great discussion on what this win means for Iran and the world. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you so much for turning in. You'll find previous episodes and more on our YouTube page and our Facebook page. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.